Hi folks, this is Mr. Hendricks. I'm going to demonstrate how to use the aseptic technique to prepare a quadrant streak plate, and this is a type of isolation method for isolating pure bacterial species from a culture which it could be a mixed culture, it could be a culture produced from a sample from a patient, for example, where we suspect there's probably going to be more than one bacteria in the culture to begin with, and so we need a way to isolate out individual strains or individual species of bacteria from that culture. Or we may be starting with a culture that we produced in the lab that we may think should be a pure culture already, but we just want to make sure, so we streak it out again and spread it out on the plate. So this is just simply a means of separating out bacteria and getting individual colonies of individual species. So let's get started. So I'm going to do two demonstrations. I'm going to do this at-home style demonstration, which uses some materials that you might have at your house. Okay, so this is to mimic what you'll be doing. Then I'm going to do a demonstration that is going to be using all the actual lab materials that I have. So that will probably be in a separate video to do that one. So let's get started. I'll show you my materials. Oh, and before even getting started on this, what we want to do is make sure all our doors are shut in our room. If there's any type of air circulating, if there's a way to minimize or stop that, like cutting off the air conditioning temporarily for the room or anything like that, we want to do that. Also, we wouldn't want to do this underneath an air vent. Okay, so you wouldn't, if you could avoid it, you'd rather do it in another part of the room where there's not an air vent nearby. Anything to minimize the flow of air coming onto your plate when you're opening the lid, right? Also, I used a disinfectant on the, what did I use? It's called coverage spray, but you just want to use some kind of disinfectant on your table. You obviously want everything to be clean when you get started. Got on some gloves, a mask, some glasses, long sleeve coat, so I'm all protected, and this is also going to protect my culture from contamination. All right, here's my materials. I've got Scotch tape, or masking tape, I forget what it's called, but anyway, it's just regular tape. Okay, that's for labeling. I've got a marker for labeling. I have my original culture, which I've already labeled, because we're imagining that this culture has already been grown in. Say we started it yesterday or the day before, and it's already had time to grow, so it should have already been labeled. So I've got my initials, and then I've got the date that the culture was started, and then the bacteria, E. coli, the type of media that it's in, TSB, that means tryptic soy broth. Yours could be nutrient broth. It could be, just depending on what you're growing, it's going to be a different type of broth, whatever broth is good for that bacteria or for whatever you're doing it for. Okay. I've got a Bunsen burner. It's just a glue bottle. I've got a striker. It's just a black marker. I've got a pin for my inoculating loop and a little Tupperware dish to set it on, and you don't have to have that, but really your loop, once you get started, your loop shouldn't leave your hand the whole time. But just in case, if something were to happen, if I had to set it down, it's good to have something here that you can set it down where only the handle is going to touch it and the actual loop is hanging off in the air, so that way it wouldn't contaminate the table with bacteria. Okay. And I've got my Petri dish. I've got 2 pieces of cardstock. It's just thick paper. You could use cardboard. And the bottom, I've already marked into quadrants, 4 quadrants, okay? And then the lid is pink, so the bottom's blue, lid is pink. And on the underside of the lid, I put some things to space the lid apart from the bottom so that I can demonstrate lifting it up. And this is probably the biggest thing I want you to do in your video, different from original video that you saw in the original example, which is to have this spaced from the bottom so that you can demonstrate how you would lift that. Because if you just have 2 pieces of paper and they're not spaced apart, you can't really pick it up the right way. So I used a special tape and just stacked pieces of it on top of each other. If you don't have anything like that, You could just glue little tiny pieces of cardboard here or cotton from a Q-tip, whatever works. You can glue pieces of foam, anything that works just to space it apart. All right, let's get started. So, first thing I want to do is label. I already labeled my tube. What I need to do is flip this over and label the bottom of my Petri dish. I'm going to put my initials. I'm going to write the bacteria name, E. coli. I'm going to write the date that I'm actually doing this, starting this culture. And I'm going to put the type of media that it's in. Now, you might also have an ID number if you're doing something like this in a clinical laboratory or hospital setting or something like that. We don't have to worry about that. All right, so here's what it looks like on the bottom. Notice that I did all my writing around the edge. That way, it doesn't get in the way of seeing the bacteria. All right, so I'm putting that down. The lid is on top. Bottom is on the bottom. I did not invert it, right? It's just right side up right now. I'm not going to invert it until I put it in the incubator to grow it. I'm going to light my striker. I'm going to use my striker to light my Bunsen burner. Click, click, fire. There you go. Okay, so I'm going to flame my loop for about 10 seconds, making sure that it gets red hot. Everything but the handle gets red hot. So the wire in the loop is red hot. All right, now I'm going to get my original culture that I'm taking a sample from. Use my pinky to remove the lid, flame it. I'm sort of rotating it a little bit as I do this so I can get all sides of the tube. 2 or 3 seconds, that's good. Go ahead and drop that loop into there. Withdraw a loop full of that bacteria. Flame that 2 or 3 seconds and put the lid on. Put the culture back where it's sitting. Done with that. Okay. Now, for this part, recenter a little bit and move that a little closer to you. All right, now what I want to do is lift this lid. Oh, I've got to rotate because I need my number 1 quadrant in the right position here. So it's convenient for me. So, okay. Now, I'm going to do that so you can actually see the pin marks. All right, I'm going to barely lift the lid. And I did zigzags throughout quadrant 1. Now I need to flame my loop for a good 10 seconds. Make sure it gets red hot. Now I'm going to stop here and show you what it looks like. Okay? But you wouldn't pull the lid all the way off like this, but I'm going to do it so I can show you just what it looks like. Okay? Quadrant 1. Now notice, so all my streaks are within quadrant 1, and the pattern of zigzag lines is roughly parallel to the line between quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. Okay, they're all going to be parallel to the next line like that. All right, so now that was kind of time out to show you that. All right, time in again. So we flamed our loop. We're going to rotate the plate a quarter turn. That's about 90 degrees. We lift it up just enough to get in there with that loop and zigzag from quadrant 1. You go through the zigzag of quadrant 1 out to quadrant 2 and then zigzag through quadrant 2 about 10 times. Now I need to flame my loop again. Now I'll show you what it looks like again. Okay. So now we've got our next quadrant filled in. So I started here in quadrant 1. I moved across to get that bacteria from quadrant 1 and dragged it to 2 and then went back and forth. Notice the lines from quadrant 1 are perpendicular to the lines in quadrant 2. All right. All right, so now we're back in. All right, so made sure that was good, that loop was good and flamed. Now I'm going to rotate this again, another 90 degrees. Okay, I'm going to lift it just enough. I'm going to drag from quadrant 2 into quadrant 3 Okay. Now I'm going to flame my loop again. I'll show you what it looks like again. Okay, so time out. All right. So starting from quadrant 1, then we dragged into quadrant 2, and then we started in 2 and we dragged into quadrant 3. Now we just have one more to go. Okay. All right. Time in. So loop is flamed. Okay, we're rotating 90 degrees. We are dragging from quadrant 3 into quadrant 4. Okay, now flaming our loop one more time. Really good. All right, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to cut my burner off. Okay, move that out of the way. All right, so remember, every time you're doing this, you're just lifting the plate just enough that you can see what you're doing and do what you need to do and then close the plate. Close the lid. All right. Now here's what it looks like. When I did that last quadrant, we've got, all right, dragging from 3 to 4, zigzag. And down here I started doing dots just to show how the bacteria would ideally, it would start looking like this at the end. Now, of course, that's after it's grown, but really you're just zigzagging back and forth, but the bacteria is so spread out that by the time it grows, it just looks like individual colonies there. So that's the whole point of it. Now, I have seen people do this the other way, but it's not the best, it's not the most ideal way to prevent contamination. I've seen people do it where they have it upside down and they do it like this, so they're holding the bottom like this and doing the streaks and then doing it like that. Right, in between, they flame it, and then so they go back and forth like that. Problem with that is, anytime I turn my plate like this, my auger is exposed to the air now. So even if I work quickly, any little air can bring bacteria onto that plate. So there's a lot more exposure. Also, the inside of the lid is exposed the whole time too. So bacteria could fall, land on here, then anytime I flip it back over, it could touch the auger and start growing. Versus having it with the top on top and just lifting it a little bit, I'm protecting it from bacteria coming in. All right.